Thank you so much. I'm like all emotional, and you know, like sort of writing this book was such a journey. And so you're in the archives, you're in the history books, you're online, and you're like, oh, I got to get photo permissions, and got to meet with Laura again this week and go over this thing. And so it's just like the work and challenge of putting this all together is sort of now kind of coming out of my body. You're just like, I'm emotional right now. I think I'm, you know, I can sort of see and feel the reactions from everyone, and it's really beautiful.
Yeah, I feel the same way. You spend a lot of time. This book was an enormous effort, and it took a lot, I think, for both of us emotionally and just logistically, and how do we tell this story, and you know, it was 2 years probably of a lot of effort, so it means so much to have you all here and to have those of you who have spoken speak from your hearts about these books. It's really, I can't imagine a more meaningful experience, so thank you. Gosh, how do you even, do you want to talk a little more about Biddy Mason's life?
Yeah, definitely. So we've all kind of, just from the previous speakers, have gotten a gist of Biddy Mason's life. She was born enslaved in Georgia, 1818, and died in 1891 in what is now Los Angeles. You know, she was, yes, an entrepreneur, a healer, a midwife, a philanthropist. She's a mother, which I think is a very crucial thing in moving Biddy along, you know, wanting to protect her three daughters. A lot of her dreams were about how to have them live well, to know freedom, to be set up in life when she became one of the wealthiest people in Los Angeles. And that has nothing to, you know, we often break down those statistics to be like, one of the wealthiest Black people. No, she was one of the wealthiest people in Los Angeles. She was one of the founders of the first African Methodist Episcopal Church in Los Angeles, started a school, a daycare. When Black folks started migrating west after emancipation, she provided home and shelter, food. So Biddy Mason is definitely a blueprint for making nothing into something, but also a blueprint of beauty and of healing and of strength that doesn't necessarily have to be rooted in these stereotypical assumptions of what Black women bodies can do, but strength in a negotiation between the reality, the immaterial, the spirit, and a willingness to be a future maker. And so I see a lot of like future in Biddy. Like, she's here now, and she's gonna be here, you know, way ahead of us and way behind us. She's just all around us in these amazing ways.
So we won't take too much time. You all have heard a lot, but we're going to thank some people. And I'm going to go a list to make sure I get to everybody. So thank you to Vita, an African American Museum and Library, for hosting. There, I don't think could be a better place. Hopefully we'll do it again in LA, and then we'll like cover all the bases, I think. To Steve Wasserman and all the people at Heyday, many of whom are here, and you should talk to them. These are really passionate people putting really important books into the world, who have given the kind of scope for these kinds of books that I think allows for some of what I was saying about what we're able to do here. I've worked in the children's publishing industry for a long time, in Children's Book Press, which is a nonprofit bilingual and multicultural picture book publisher in San Francisco. Also, I was an editor at Lee and Low Books in New York, which is a multicultural picture book publisher. But I know from the inside how many gatekeepers there are in terms of the types of books we write for kids and the way we look in particular at history and slavery, or the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. A lot of these parts of our history that are so important for us to face if we're gonna make real change and move forward in a different way. So Heyday has allowed these books to come into the world in a way that I can't imagine very many other publishers doing. Molly Woodward, our editor, who's here, I think back over there, was really a key person in both of these books. I think of it as like a table with 3 legs almost, and she's one of those legs that we would all be falling down if Molly wasn't there. So she was just right in there helping and talking and having so much compassion for the bumps along the way and keeping us going, I think, some of the time. To Abdi and Candace and other people at the ACLU of Northern California who have been such incredible champions and supporters of these books. It has, I know, been an enormous value and meaning to us as we also hit those bumps to know that we had that support and also input and shaping of the content in the books and really helping us to make them as good as we can, though any mistakes are definitely our own. To, where's my list? Regina Evans for your beautiful talk. Where are you, Regina? No, she had to go because she's an incredibly busy woman who does this amazing, really creative work as well as what she talked about. Beautiful.
She's working on a play.
She's working on a play, artistic, creative, and the work that she does, which is so important. There's my list. To the artist, Laura Freeman, who created these beautiful illustrations. She lives too far away to be here. To Stan Yogi and to Malcolm Margolin, who are really the original envisioners of this series. And we heard some of the story, and Elaine Ellenson for her work on Wherever There's a Fight. This is really what, I talk about this book series as a Takes a Village book series, and it feels absolutely like that. And one of the things I love thinking is that each book expands the village, and it's just this beautiful collection of amazing people. It's the world I want to live in, and I'm so blessed to be in it. To Susan Anderson, who was, as we heard, the acting director, curator here, and who's now working for the California Historical Society, who's writing a book that's going to come out with Heyday on the history of African Americans in California, and who gave us some really invaluable feedback, including that I think we had that Biddy Mason was one of the wealthiest black women in Los Angeles, or the wealthiest black woman, and she said, no, take away black. She was the wealthiest woman in Los Angeles in her time. To Sharia Mosley, who's not here, but who was a PhD graduate with Ebony Thomas, who's the scholar who really is an expert on the representation of slavery in children's books. Sharia gave us invaluable feedback on so many levels and read multiple drafts of the book. And then personal thank yous, I'll start and then pass to Arisa. My family have been incredibly supportive. My boyfriend, Mitch, who's sitting here, has been incredibly supportive, always a cheerleader. And especially, and I've dedicated the book to my mother, who's videotaping right now, Carol Pearson, who read probably more drafts of this book as it was being written than anybody else. I think I must have gotten some of my love of history from her. She's such an inspiration and supporter to me. And to my daughter, Cassie, who's not here, she said she's proud of me, but there's a lot of talking at these things. She's 11, and she's really, the book is for a lot of kids, but she's really right there. So I'm going to pass it on to Arisa for hers.
I want to definitely thank my wife, Samantha Florio, for just being along the journey with me. All of the wonderful mothers in my life, my grandmother, Hattie Mae White, my Aunt Bernice, who actually, while writing this book, and I was sort of at that point of struggling and being like, how do I access this? Feeling this sense of like, okay, I've been brought on because of, my amazing poetry skills and my intelligence, and as well as my black womanness, but how do I write this? How do I use this knowledge to kind of, sink into what is Biddy Mason's life and what I know of her. And so I was speaking to my Aunt Bernice, and she's like, Arisa, don't you know your great-great-grandmother was a midwife back in Georgia? And so I was like, no, I didn't know that. And, and I just sat with that, did some meditation, and found my way to like open up that sort of like spiritual pathway to be like, this too is my story, and not in that sort of superficial way, but I am rooted in this, and I have these threads I can access. And I also want to thank my mom, who has been, you know, my own sort of little herbalist and sort of helping me deal with my women's problems by giving me like herbs that were in jars and tinctures, and we would all be like, Mom, what are you doing? So these women in my life I am very grateful for. Yeah, so what we'll do is we will read the opening poem. I will read the opening poem, and so you can get a sense of the format of the book, and Laura will talk about the historical insights that follow. So in writing the book, one of the challenges is that there's not very much history sort of written about Biddy Mason. There are some children's books, and so what we had to do a lot of was sort of fill in the details with historical research, and one of the things we wanted to do, because this was for a younger readership, is to start in childhood with Biddy Mason's life. In part, I felt like, you know, we often don't get depictions of youth and enslavement, so that would be like a great way to start the book, to create relationship between the reader and the material. So yeah, we're starting at childhood, healing. On a cool summer morning, 7-year-old Biddy and Granny Allen tread carefully through the woods. See those oval-shaped leaves? Granny points. Biddy rubs the slippery leaves through her fingers. We use plantain to make a salve for cuts and slashes we get from work in the fields, Granny says. She has taken care of Biddy since she was sold away from her mother as a baby. Even though Granny isn't allowed to read or write, she knows how to read plants. Nature is like an open hand. It gives in abundance, Granny explains. She shows Biddy fuzzy white clusters of bone set that bring down a fever, and snake roots purple flowers that heal snake bites. We must be like nature, Granny Allen says, because nothing good can come when we close our hands to others. Granny takes Biddy's hand. As they tread on, she sings, I sought my Lord in the wilderness, for I'm a-going home. Biddy feels free in the woods. She thinks, I want to be a healer like Granny and help my pulled-together families survive. Biddy picks peach leaves to make a tea that will rid Uncle Eugene of stomach worms he got from poorly cooked pork Master gives them to eat. Back at their place, Biddy mashes up green briar leaves with hog lard to make a salve for 10-year-old Lula's burn. Mistress overheard Lula say she was tired from tending to the baby for 12 hours straight. Mistress ran a hot iron down Lula's arm to teach her some respect. The salve will return Lula's skin to brown. Out of breath, Aunt Della's husband hollers into the door. She's starting to labor. Biddy packs Granny's bag with clean clothes, cloths, strained oils, teas, and a clean, sharp knife. The gift for the baby, a doll she made from an old flour sack, goes into her pocket. Quickly, they head to Della's quarters. Biddy starts a fire to boil water. She then puts an axe under Della's bed. Biddy learned from Granny Allen, who learned from her own granny in Africa, that the axe cuts the pain. Biddy knows when it's time to position her body behind Della's lower back to take the pressure off. Della's moans become deep and loud. Together, Granny and Biddy say, push, Della, push. So, in learning about Biddy Mason's life, one of the amazing things that I got to learn about was medicinal plants that midwives used. And also in researching kind of local plants within sort of like the Georgia area, I learned about boneset, which brings down a fever, peach tree leaves. And so these are kind of images we have that follow each of the poems. Either we'll talk about medicinal plants or the symbology behind nature and plant life in one way to connect the reader to the natural environment, as well as to share, you know, the knowledge that Biddy had about the land and how to use it for its healing purposes. And I just think it's just really amazing. I felt like my world came alive when I started to learn about the medicinal qualities and of the plant life and how nature is here interacting with us and healing us and is available to us.
So the format of the book is that we have the biography in free verse, which Arisa's just read, and the thinking behind that is to partially have actually accessible text for readers who may not be reading at a super high level with the short lines on the page, but also really to engage the reader with this person's life in a very immediate way, so this doesn't feel like ancient, stale history. With the Fred Korematsu book, we had a lot on the record. He was alive much more recently. His daughter, Karen Korematsu, was involved in the book. So we could have a lot more information and quotes, and basically everything in that book is straight nonfiction. It's gotten different categories or categorized differently, but as Arisa was saying, in this book we had to make up a lot for Biddy Mason to bring her to life in that way. But we also have what we call insets, which is a way for the readers to engage with the kind of factual background and extend the topic of that poem. So in this case, at the beginning of the book, we talk about how Bridget Biddy Mason was born in Hancock County, Georgia in 1818, where she was enslaved. But one of the things that we've also done is put in definitions. And it's been really interesting getting feedback from people about how powerful and useful these definitions are. So when we define enslaved, and that's, oh, I've got a thing, anyway, it's right here. Enslaved, when someone is held as a slave and loses their freedom of choice and action. Many people prefer the term enslaved person instead of slave. Slave is a noun that defines a person only according to the system of slavery. Enslaved is an adjective that speaks to how that person was treated. So these definitions are there to give information, but they actually become a whole added way of asking questions, engaging readers, getting people to think more critically about the language that we use and the impact that that has. We have the questions, who is in your pulled together family. We use those throughout as a way to get readers to reflect on what's happening in the story and think about it in their own lives. And yeah, the second page, just here, we talk about power. Power can mean many things and can exist and work in many ways. A basic definition of power is the ability to produce an effect. It can also mean control or influence over others. How do you see power at work in your community and in our country? And this came out in part from the first book, where we defined discrimination with Fred Korematsu, and Deborah Menkart, who runs Teaching for Change, that's a fantastic resource, said she thought there was a risk with the way we talked about it, that it could make discrimination seem inevitable, that we didn't talk enough about systems of power and maybe equalized a bit too, like when we were looking at Irish Americans being discriminated against versus Chinese Americans. So that really influenced us thinking, how are we going to talk about slavery, racism, the creation of the idea of race, which we unpick over here. I mean, the amount of time put in almost every word in some of these insets, and Molly knows, she was there for these long conversations, was in a lot. It was a lot. So there's a lot of thought, and hopefully tools. We also have timelines, images, a lot of primary source documents that we found. So hopefully there's a lot for you when you're reading the book and for the young people that you're sharing it with both pieces.
And I think what's exciting about when you use a historical figure to kind of move through history, you're able to frame how we look at the same sort of typical things, right? And thinking about power. But when you sort of center Biddy Mason and how Biddy Mason would think about power, it becomes this very nuanced way of thinking about agency, how despite one's circumstances, we still have the ability to figure out how to change within our circumstances. So that's kind of one of the great parts about the insets and the sort of very historical, factual stuff and the definitions, is that it's helping us shift and become more nuanced in how we see and experience certain things. As a part of the Fighting for Justice series, like, one of our goals is to have readers be engaged, and so a part of that engagement is thinking and sort of reflecting on how they can change their communities. So the final section to the book, we look at connecting to the present, and you've all heard from Regina Evans, and we ask questions to the readers about, like, how can you be like Biddy and extend an open heart and hand to your community? We also want the readers to reflect on this idea of love, you know, as what needs healing, what needs love, you know, thinking about an emotional connection to change, not as it's something outside of our experiences, but something that is very close to us. We've also listed organizations started by women in particular who could no longer be silenced regarding the dehumanization of Black life. We have the Black Lives Matter movement up there, Black Women for Wellness, and in connection to human trafficking and sort of seeing how, you know, enslavement is operating today. We speak about Regina Evans, and then we also provide some organizations that can help our readers identify people who are being trafficked in their communities. But yeah, I'm really, you know, just excited by, like, what the book does. You know, so you go through history, now it's like, what can you do to change things?
I think that's our last slide, right? Yeah, that's our last slide. So thank you so much to everyone for coming. Time? Do people want to ask questions, or are we ready to get books signed? What do you think? What time is it? 1:25,
like 3:25.
3:25. We should probably sign books. Ask us questions when you're getting your book signed. Thank you.
Stay in place for 1 second. This is only takes 2 seconds.
Oh, we got to get the good PR pictures.
Lauren,